I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Anders Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers,
Anton.
And Aaron.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month we're talking about the latest film in the Scream franchise, Scream 6. We appreciate you listening, and if you haven't yet given this podcast a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast service, please do so. Ratings are an important way for independent podcasts like this one to extend their reach, and it really helps. Now, on with the show.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
This isn't like any other Ghostface.
What is this place?
A shrine.
We've got to lure him in.
We execute him.
Hello.
Let's play a game.
You know you're like the 10th guy to try this, right? It never works out for the dipshit in the mask.
Maybe. But there's never been one like me, Gale. I'm something different.
Scream 6 is the latest film in what we can now call the Scream franchise. The sequel to the requel, as the characters in the film self-consciously call it. Returning directors from the 2022 legacy sequel Scream, Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett, moved the film's central cast of survivors from the town of Woodsboro to New York City. The film follows Jenna Ortega's Tara Carpenter from the last film as she begins university. Her half-sister Sam, played by Melissa Barrera, follows her to Manhattan, ostensibly to protect her as she struggles with her own legacy as the daughter of the original Ghostface killer, Billy Loomis, played by Skeet Ulrich. Just like all of the films in the Scream series, this latest entry is movie-obsessed and self-aware, interrogating the rules and conventions of horror films, especially teen slashers and horror franchises, even as the film engages in those rules and conventions itself. The fictional movie series within the series, Stab, allows for characters to reflect directly on movie conventions and the nature of horror fan culture. And as a sequel to the requel, characters in this film note that the rules are increasingly out the window, with legacy characters and even main characters now potentially targets or suspects, even if the movie ultimately may not go through with those violations. Moving on from Woodsboro, Scream 6 has fun with its New York setting. Montreal's McGill University stands in for the fictional Manhattan set Blackmore. It also switches up the classic Scream opening kill to unsettle our expectations as it seemingly immediately reveals the identity of the killer of a film professor in a back alley. The professor, played by Samara Weaving from the director's earlier film Ready or Not, in a self-referential nod, is killed by her film student, played by Tony Revolori, only for the film to switch it up again and have the killer himself be the final pre-credit victim of Ghostface. After that, Sam and Tara find themselves being targeted by a killer or multiple killers in Ghostface masks during Halloween in Manhattan. We get bodega fights and killers in Ghostface masks on a crowded subway car, with Halloween revelers dressed as iconic horror movie characters. Scream 6 does go pretty big and bloody, but never overshoots in its ambition. I enjoyed Scream 6 and the previous requel a fair bit. And while they still engage in a lot of the knowing and self-referential play that made the original Scream film so much fun, it does lack some of the humor and satire that the first three films had, even as they maintain their genuinely scary moments. This is the first Scream film not to feature Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott, though Courtney Cox returns as Gale Weathers. I like Melissa Barrera a lot as the new lead in Sam, although the attempts at creating genuine moments of sentiment between her and her sister Tara don't always gel that well with the tone of the rest of the film. Now, one thing I noted a few years ago about the original film is that ultimately, while these films poke at and discuss slasher films, they aren't entirely slashers in the way, say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre or even Halloween are. The recurring mystery of who has donned the Ghostface mask and perpetrated the killings makes the Scream series much more mystery-oriented than most slashers, with the unmasking and the killer's monologues at the end acting as a kind of R-rated episode of Scooby-Doo. The lack of supernatural elements and the focus on the mechanics of the gruesome kills recalls the giallo genre, a genre of Italian crime mystery films with mystery killers that had a significant influence on filmmakers like Brian De Palma, among others. This new film even references this in the opening scene. Revolori's character is called a huge Argento nerd, and a Giallo fan who got a C on his last assignment. The black gloves of the hidden killer from Giallo are here replaced by the Ghostface Halloween mask. So, do you both agree that this film is a solid continuation of the series, even if it isn't quite as good as the first couple of films in the 90s? Aaron, you're probably the biggest horror fan of all of us and a fan of the first of these Scream Legacy sequels, which you reviewed for the site. What's your take on Scream 6?
I enjoyed Scream 6 quite a bit. I don't quite like it as much as Scream 5, which I was a huge fan of. But I think it's come to the point where Scream is maybe the only horror series where I like every single entry. And in that sense, it's probably my favorite horror series, even if, I might individually hold up Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween as being better than Scream.
Like those particular films?
Yeah, exactly. Those individual films. But I'm saying the franchise as a whole, like all 6 of these movies I like. I think they're all good. They all work. I don't think they're all equally good. Like, I think the first Scream is like dynamite, like absolute classic. The second one is one of the great horror sequels because it just does all the sequel stuff so well and rips fun of that. Other ones, they vary in how successful they are, but they all have their own novelty to both the set pieces and the approach to the meta narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the meta narratives is probably where this one is a little lacking. It reminded me a lot of Scream 4, which is fitting because Hayden Panettiere's Kirby shows up in this one and she's in 4, and they reference a lot of the stuff in 4. And similar to that one, it seems like a lot of the resentments in this film by the killers when they're eventually really revealed is partially fueled by an anger over the like notoriety of the main central character. So it's this kind of like misplaced fandom or a counter fandom that they like use and wield against the hero. And in this case, like they build that up on themselves. That's part of the reveal, right? But it doesn't have quite as much of that brilliant takedown of like, so, Scream 2 is all about the sequels, and in sequels this is the rule and you can kill off original characters, and then Scream 3 is about trilogies, and trilogies are all about capping things off and
the huge reversal.
Exactly, big reversals, and we're tying things from the first one, and it's not just connecting to the last one, it's connecting to all of them. And then
everything you knew was wrong.
And the thing I loved about Scream 5, or Scream as it was titled last year, is all the requel stuff. It just hits it so strongly throughout, and even the beats of the movie hit those. Like the structure of Scream 5 is essentially the structure of Force Awakens, and it's like it like reminds you that it's doing that in the movie, and then it still does it, and it's still effective. Like all the stuff with Dewey is Han Solo. Like
yeah, right? I liked your comment in your review about Dewey showing up like Han Solo, reluctantly and grizzled, and
he's so grizzled,
and he gets his heroic moment, but so this one doesn't have quite that, but I do appreciate the franchise comments and they bring it in there. But I think it kind of going back to the first comment and your Giallo comment, this one it kind of lives and dies on the set pieces, and I think it has 2 really good set pieces, which is escaping the house or the apartment when Ghostface is in there and climbing across the ladder, and the subway scene.
Yeah.
And those are just the cases where Scream, unlike a lot of other sequels or a lot of other horror franchises, I think has consistently been scary in that each movie in the series actually is able to generate tension and scares and not devolve into just being a joke.
But I think I think with this, like this 6th one, what I admire most is probably not, it's not even just the scares, I guess, like you mentioned, the set pieces, but then it's sort of the building and sustaining of tension. This, in some sense, actually the suspense, and I think the scene where they're trying to escape the apartment is a really good suspense sequence. Partly because it operates on Hitchcock rules of suspense, where you make things like the tension is because like you're anticipating what's going to happen. It's not about the surprise in that moment. Exactly. You even get moments of like a rear window moment where the neiber lover guy is like looking through and he's like trying to get their attention.
He's trying to phone her
attention. And then it's as if, right, like it's as if they're crossing over to the rear window by how they escape across the alleyway on that like the ladder. I would just say I think 6. It's hard for me to say whether I like 5 or 6 better, and I'm just going to call it 5 for the sake of clarity, even though it was called Scream, and it was fitting that it was called just Scream because that's
just like Halloween 2018.
That's a requel, like reboot thing to do. So I know they did it for that reason. But anyway, so five is better at the meta, the satire. I think that
I think 5's funnier,
and it's funnier.
It's because it's got Jack Quaid. Like,
but I think this
really.
one's actually better. I think this one's actually better for the suspense and the set pieces.
It's bigger too at the end.
So that's my take on it, is that I think I come away like actually having, 2, maybe even 3. Like I would also say like the subway scene is really good. And I actually like the bodega scene too.
Yeah, me too.
Just sort of like the visual of Ghostface with like a shotgun and a bodega.
Yeah, exactly.
and I think it's like it's not like so much a horror scene. Like it could be a crime movie.
Yep.
The way the suspense is built, and you're stalking the aisles. But that I also thought was a really good scene. Capturing also serve a good atmosphere for New York City. I didn't find this movie that funny, and I think
no.
Some of it's. You mentioned in your intro, Anders, like how both these films kind of try to lean into some of like the sister drama as if we're supposed to take it like seriously, means that there's a slight difference in terms of tone from like the earlier ones, where I think the earlier ones are a little bit more ruthless in their satire, in the sense of that basically everyone but Sydney is up for scorn.
I'll jump off a couple of comments that you make here. So, Aaron, as you said, this one, as a sequel, it kind of plays off some of the things in Scream 2. They go to college, right? You have all that kind of stuff.
You're right. It is.
It also, there's a little bit in the way that, so Scream 3, where they go to Hollywood, right, really takes advantage of the Hollywood Hills, the giant director's mansions, stuff like that. This one also really takes advantage, probably even more so, of its setting in New York. I think that's why we like the bodega scene, the subway scene. These are things you couldn't do in Woodsboro, right?
But also, just like the identity of the villains and their motivation is the same as in Scream 2 as well.
Exactly. Without giving it away, it is the same. Yeah.
It's getting back for the previous film. It's like, yeah.
Number 3 borders on going too far into humor at times. Like, it's not.
So I haven't seen 3 or 4.
Yeah. I won't spoil 3 or 4 for you, but without spoiling it, number 3, there are moments of like over the top satire. There's a character, so they're making a film within the film that Parker Posey's playing a character who's based on Gale Weathers, and she's so ridiculous. Like, it's like every scene she's in is like a straight up full comedy. Even the end, it gets very goofy. This movie never gets that goofy, but this movie plays it big. Like the whole set at the end in the like shrine to the Ghostface killers with the nine cloaks and stuff. I kind of love that stuff. I think it's like,
no, that's a good sequence. That sequence is also very Scooby-Doo.
Yes, that's what I like. And this goes back to my thing. One of the thing I like about this, and I think that Samantha Carpenter, I love that they're Carpenter, also a little horror film person there. I think Sam, she plays well in that hero. And I'm wondering what you guys think of my idea that like, so since it's revealed in the first of the requels, that Sam is so Tara's half sister Sam is actually Billy Loomis's daughter, right, from the Skeeter from the first film. And there's these bits where like I kind of wish they didn't have as much of the sentiment and just like let Sam lean a little more into the like anti-hero stuff.
Maybe it'll be the third one. Maybe Sam's
maybe. Like I don't want her to ever
Ghostface.
like go full villain, but I do like that she's like kind of like the anti-hero. Like she's if to make the Star Wars comparison, maybe she's almost a Kylo Ren kind of character or something like that in her. Or
well, they do basically
like
in this movie, like you have to channel your dark side.
Exactly.
Like,
but they even had that in the last one. Remember?
Yeah,
like,
that's what exactly. Like the ending of the last one is really like
the
that
the skeet hallucination helps her
exactly
survive.
Here it almost like borders on to compare it to the last horror film we covered, Halloween Ends. I'm like, is she gonna be the Corey Cunningham?
Oh yeah.
Is she gonna inherit the mantle?
Well, she's not quite as damaged as Corey, but
no.
Yeah, there's no one to crawl into a hole and learn from.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ghostface is living in the sewers.
But her whether it's hallucinations or whatever of her father, are the closest the series ever gets to actual like sort of supernatural elements without overtly going there.
But I actually like those moments because I think it's true that the satire in the 5 and 6, and especially 6, is a little bit weaker, and the film loses its indictment of the characters, the core 4 or whatever, right? Like, it's not as ruthless about them as it is about Dewey and Gale in the originals.
Well,
But it's pretty ruthless of horror.
It won't let
fans,
anyone
though.
die, like, in that sense.
Well, I think they do that because Sam and Tara are very like humorless. Like, Tara tries a little bit, but I actually think the pure like franchise. So the scene where Mindy is explaining the franchise rules, and she's like, it's
Randy.
it's all about having to perpetuate the franchise. Franchises are simply about justifying their own existence. And so the fact that they both survive, and there's like throwaway lines being like, they missed an artery, and like
twice. I
yes,
kind of thought Chad was dead after the.
Oh, I totally
How
thought
many
Chad
knife
was
wounds
dead.
does Chad take in each of these movies? He's just like literally this Ghostface is just going to town on his body all the time.
Yeah, but
He's a pincushion.
I think they're actually, it's a pure franchise thing that they don't want to cut them off because they need the nerd characters to bring in the meta stuff. They don't want to introduce a new one. They also realize that they're like the two funny characters, and that if you don't have them, you don't have the kind of levity that might make this series scream, as opposed
Yeah, it
to
would
just
just turn
another.
into a bunch of sequences where the sisters are looking like
Scared.
either like longfully or scared at each other and into each other's eyes in the midst of whatever the scene is.
I do think Sam. My comments on her, like, I think she's good at looking badass. Like when she gets the knife and she's like takes off the jacket and she's like, I'm gonna fight. She's like a good final girl, kind of like, but kind of verging into like kick ass, kind of without. I don't know.
You haven't seen Ready or Not, have you?
No, I haven't seen.
Yeah, because so in Ready or Not, the whole plot of Ready or Not is like she meets this guy, and then it's like, oh, we're gonna have like, it's a special event in this like estate, and it's like, oh, we're gonna do a role play. You're the bride, and it's like, you're actually the bride. We're gonna like marry you into this like creepy family, and then she goes hog on everybody, and like that's what it's just Samara Weaving with like a shotgun in a bridal dress, like blowing people away and stuff with a crossbow.
I did think the opening of the scene was pretty kind of meta and funny and brutal, and I like Tony Revolori and Samara Weaving and the whole.
That was a really good, really
one
good
of the common
double
friend of
phone
ours
call
once
sequence.
made about Scream 2. And the good scene, the very funny scenes when they're talking about sequels at the college with like Randy and Mickey, like Timothy-Olyphant's character and stuff.
Are you suggesting that someone's trying to make a real-life sequel?
Stab 2? Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck.
No, come on, man.
Oh, please. By definition alone, they're inferior films.
It's bullshit generalization. Many sequels have surpassed their original.
Oh, yeah?
Name one.
Yeah. Aliens. Far better than the first.
Yeah, well, there's no accounting for taste.
Thank you, Ridley Scott rules. Name another.
No.
Aliens is a classic, okay? Get away from her, you bitch. I believe the line is stay away from her, you bitch. It's film class, right?
But like he's like, that's not how a university film class goes. It's like nothing like it. Whereas it seems like a little more. Here it's like, we get a little more of like Samara Weaving as like this like associate professor.
Yeah.
And
it's a little bit more satiric. Like there's some satire of like,
contemporary university stuff.
Yeah, in the way she like describes what she does and stuff.
So that was
I was just gonna say like the thing with put a close the book on the Sam comment. It's just I think it's slightly transgressive to lean into the fact that like, oh, in a slasher film in the modern day and age, to actually survive it, you have to be a bit of a psychopath. And like you have to be more vicious than the people that are going to kill you, or else you might not survive. And both these movies kind of show that. And when she actually like dons the Ghostface stuff at the end and just murks them, it's like, okay, that's kind of, it's fun, but you're also like, it's a little much for like the hero of a horror movie to just start just stabbing like 100 times.
Although Sydney killed people in every movie.
No, she does too.
She doesn't relish it the same way.
No, she doesn't relish
but
it though. Yeah.
To the satire point, we should probably focus on the opening scene, because the opening scene is always the iconic stuff in all the Scream movies,
and it's
right?
the most satirical, right?
Exactly. But that's actually, I think, one of the things with these movies, and I think 5 and 6, it's very important that these films have identified the true villains are fans.
Yeah.
And it makes that like, it's very adamant about that. And even the opening scene with Tony Revolori, it's like, you're a stupid fan. You're not even smart enough to actually do it like a real fan who will kill you then. And your like friend. And even the whole ending, right? It's this mausoleum. It's a fandom cult thing. We've got every possible item from the films. We've got all the real stuff. Oh my God. It's like that. The value of this. How did they get this? Oh, people like
there's that comment. They're like, how could they afford all this stuff?
Cops like money.
But like, so It is interesting because I mean I think then it in being you know a reboot, requel, legacy, sequel, you know, these two, that totally makes sense that one of these sort of extra textual contexts, like it's all about, is sort of fandom, because is the biggest, you know, context for any of these reboots or legacy sequels or requels to when they come out, is what's going on, what's the interaction between this redo and the fan base. I think I personally think sometimes it's too easy to sort of just, it only let's just say it only slugs one direction in the satire. And I would appreciate a little bit more satire also about like the kind of the shallowness of mining, you know, like a property again and again. You get a couple jokes that way, but I feel like they're more interested in ribbing hardcore fans. But I do think like, so that is a good dimension of satire to these. Maybe, and that works probably better than sort of some sequences. Like I personally just don't think, like, you know, Mindy and her knowing of film just doesn't come across the same way as
Uncle Randy.
Yeah, as their uncle in, like, you know, in the first and the second. In the way that the first and the second movie will comment on how a movie works, well, at the exact moment they're playing out that like trope, was it kind of is operating on a different level, I think. But there, I think you're right that there's maybe more to the satire here than on
one
a
of the
first
great
take
touches
with some of that fan stuff.
One of the great touches of these films is having the Stab series within the Scream world.
Absolutely.
Because it really allows you to make it super explicit. And it's in number 5, right? When they have the scene of like Mindy watching the recreation in Stab of the scene of her uncle in the same house that they're in.
Yeah, and wasn't like aren't they like watching
that.
like a making of, or like in the 5th one, like, because there's like stuff that you're seeing and you're like it's almost like it was supposed to be like a documentary of like the potential real killings within like the world. Like there's so many levels of like sort of fake.
Yeah, Anton, you haven't seen number 4
within it,
right?
No, I haven't.
But number 4, the opening sequence is one of the most ridiculous things in the whole series.
It's just layers upon layers.
Layers upon layers. It's very good.
But so okay. One thing I think, if we make a comparison again to some of the earlier Screams, I just think one of the biggest things that makes these two, like, I still like them. I thought they were good, but sort of a step down from, say, the first two, because I haven't seen 3 or 4. I just think that the cast overall is less funny. And I think we forget even like how much of the energy and humor in like the first one is like you know, like Matthew Lillard just acting like ridiculous the entire movie. Like things like that is like so much of like the humor. It's not it is in the writing, but it's also in like the performances. And
first
like
Scream
Chad's just not as
cast.
funny. Chad's pretty good. Like I'm glad Chad's around, but you're like, he's just not as funny as like some of the characters in those movies.
I mean, but the first film, you know, is top to bottom like well cast. I mean, you have the iconic Drew Barrymore opening scene. You have Henry Winkler as the principal.
Yeah.
It's like so good.
But even number 2's got like Sarah Michelle Gellar and stuff.
Timothy-Olpin, you know, is great.
Which I haven't made this comment yet, but in addition to Giallo, the other thing that the Scream movies most resemble is the Buffy, which is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which makes sense because the whole Scooby Gang mystery, the idea of this like tight-knit group of teens who knows all the horror tropes and they're going to get to the bottom of whatever monster or killer's out there. And even these new ones remind me of almost like it's like what I could imagine if they rebooted Buffy, what it would almost like seem like. It's like similar tone and style, and you know, maybe lean a little bit more into like the trauma aspects of it, because that's just what horror is about nowadays, but still like not taking it entirely seriously.
Well, remember from Scream 5 that the Babadook is Tara's favorite horror film.
See, I love the opening of Scream 5 because it's just the killer's so incensed and so angry that she doesn't like horror movies.
You love art and TV and movies.
Okay, well, lots of people love movies.
Yeah, but she says you love scary movies and that you guys have that in common. She's proud of making a fan out of you.
She is?
Yeah. She told me the other day she wonders, what's your favorite scary movie?
The Babadook. It's an amazing meditation on motherhood and grief.
Isn't that a little fancy pants?
Well, it's elevated horror.
What does that mean, elevated horror?
You know, it's like scary, but with complex emotional and thematic underpinnings. It's not just some schlocky cheeseball nonsense with wall-to-wall jump scares.
That sounds kind of boring to me. Have you ever seen Stab?
See, there was that atrocious article, right, last week, the W magazine of like why horror movies before 2016 or 17 when Get Out came out were bad. And the opening scene of Scream 5 is just like a person who thinks like that is a complete idiot and we're going to try and kill him. Like that's literally that scene.
I think also, so one other point of, I guess, contrast I'd say is that, and I was mentioning this to Anders, and I maybe even touched upon this earlier in the podcast, but like, I just find that partly because of just the way we tell stories today, and they even comment that like a series will reflect it's sort of, its decade and its period, but it's just so much less ruthless towards the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that means that actually sort of diminishes the sort of the satirical force.
Yeah, because satire is all about putting people up for scorn.
And my
That's
sense
literally
always
the
in
definition.
my sense in the first two is that literally the only person they're not making fun of is Sydney.
Yeah.
And maybe even Sydney, they're making fun of how stoic she is at times and like sort of like sad looking. But like everything and everyone, and like you got the sense that like anybody could be killed, and the movie would both do that ruthlessly and kind of make a joke out of it. Whereas in this, the weird thing is that like, and again, this is actually building on something Aaron you were talking about to me, was just that like there's a weird sense where it's like they're timid to actually kill the people, but they've actually like upped the like gore.
Yeah.
So it's like we're gonna show you like rip open, like the knife's gonna go up through someone's abdomen and start to like pull them apart in a way that you don't see in those earlier ones. But then afterwards they're like, don't worry, they're alive. Don't worry. Like we didn't kill them.
I guess medical technology
or
has
they
advanced
give
a lot in
like
25 years.
or they give like a I love you. So like there's like this like desire to have like an emotion or something to kind of like soften, but at the same time the actual visual killing is like amped up. And I actually don't know what to make of that tonally for today. And it seems to be in other horror movies today as well.
I think it is a generational thing. And I think one of the interesting things when watching the Scream films is like, the characters comment on how films sort of act as a sort of barometer of their time period in a lot of ways. And I think that's very true of these films. Like, even as much as they're aware of it, they still do. Like the emotionalism, focus on trauma and things like that. But
well,
like,
and this one's like it's a sister bond.
Yep,
it's
sister
like
bond.
the root relationship, things like that.
And one of the things like number 3, a lot of people don't like that film. I can understand. There's things
What
I
year
really
is it?
like about it.
2000?
2000. I mean, but it's hard to think of a film that's a better barometer of how like hideous our culture was in 2000 than that movie. But that's part of the reason I like it. It was like, you've got like isn't it a Creed song on the soundtrack?
Yeah,
And like bell bottom, like those like bootcut jeans and like terrible haircuts and like
just like
Jay and
rampant
Silent Bob
misogyny.
show up in one scene. Like it's just like it's like, oh man, yeah, I've totally forgot about that's what the world
Jay and
was like
Silent
back
Bob
then.
showing up.
Yes,
again?
yeah.
Oh man,
As themselves.
I gotta see that.
Like as the characters, yeah. The meta levels go deep.
Yeah, but the and they're all like that. And the 2011 film kind of feels of its time too. It's like we're not really quite sure what to make of this internet thing 100% yet. We haven't fully embraced full online culture, and the sort of political ramifications of that. It's more about like, putting yourself out there on the internet. And so I think these films really do like lean into the thing. And there's a generational thing, right? Like you have the sort of Gen Xers or young Gen Xers of the first couple of films, that sort of irony soaked kind of dryness.
Yeah,
you get the sort of like in 2011 the millennials, they have Alison Brie as the kind of like girl boss, like tough character, and Kirby's kind of like that too, kind of millennial character. And Sam and Richie and are kind of like, they even commented in the Scream 5, right, on like these young high school students, like what's the deal with like the difference, even that like 5 to 8 year difference, because Sam is kind of like a young millennial, and then Tara and her friends are like Gen Z Zoomer kind of kids, right?
Yeah.
So you even have that kind of divide, and it sort of comments on those cultural divides between generations, I think, really well.
Although some of the casting, I'm like, that's all Scream movies, but sometimes you're like you look really young. You look too young for your part, and then someone else is like, you look way too old. Like, I don't know how old Dennis Quaid's son is in number
Jack Quaid?
5, but
Yeah.
like he just looks like he's like 35. You know?
But he's supposed to be a bit older, right? Like
Is he supposed to be 35?
No, but he's supposed to be like he's very much not a like recent.
Right.
Yeah,
so
as
the actress who plays Sam, Melissa Barrera, I looked up how old she's your age here.
Yeah, she looks it. Yeah, she's a Mexican actress.
Yeah, she is
right?
Mexican.
Like, yeah.
She was in like some telenovelas and stuff like that.
She's like a TV actress.
Yep.
Yeah,
and of course, like Jenna Ortega, she's only 20. She was born in 2002.
and she was a child star too. So.
But she's also very small, and so she plays like often like she's her most famous thing is playing Wednesday, the teenager in like the Addams Family spinoff on Netflix, right? So that's kind of her thing, is playing like younger than she actually is.
Yeah, she reminds me of kind of like a Zendaya. They have this sort of like moody look. And I know they're
Zendaya's
both both huge for sort of
Amazon compared with Jenna.
Yeah, Zendaya's giant. She's like 6 feet. She makes Timothée Chalamet look so small in Dune. But see, so a lot of people, I think in the comments in this movie coming so quick after the last one, which I have to remind, Scream 2 came 1 year after Scream 1. So like
96, 97, this is 2022, 23.
And but it did feel like nowadays to have a sequel 1 year later, like exactly one calendar year later, very rare. That's kind of wild. If it's not like in a giant Marvel
the actual
thing.
production,
If they didn't
actually got it together and did it.
Yeah, that's what I'm actually. Aaron, do you know anything about the production? Had they already planned to make another one right away? No, they jumped into
the Scream 5 was a big hit, and they greenlit it like 2 weeks later.
Well
like
done,
let's go,
well
let's
done.
just go make another one immediately. Because I think they wanted to make Scream 5 earlier, and COVID like slowed down.
Okay.
So a lot of people have been like, oh, Scream 6, it's all right, but it doesn't really justify its existence. But I feel like from our discussion, it kind of does. And some of the things that might seem a little less, pointed than some of the past films in the franchise is actually more indicative of just this time and place in cinema and horror, and trying to navigate what is the point of a horror movie. Is the point of a horror movie to put a mirror up to society's evils and like unpack trauma and help people deal with like the things that scare them on a terrestrial basis? Or is it to scare the crap out of people? Or is it to make people like have fun with the killing? And this movie kind of ties those into it without really commenting on it like so much.
You're
right.
You're right. They're like a lot of the horror now. They're uncomfortable with they're uncomfortable with the knowledge that horror has like a lurid like prurient interest, like where you're taking pleasure in seeing something that you actually shouldn't be. So we try to justify it with that kind of like emotional catharsis side, which is probably the property of the central like theme of a lot of elevated horror, right? Which then speaks into that whole aspect you're talking about. So maybe it actually makes sense that our central, one of the two central heroes is a big elevated horror fan, and then sort of like embodies that through the character, right? Like Tara like acts in some sense like an elevated horror character because she's concerned with like and then Sam's working through her own like demons aspect.
Tying it back to like Justified, I think, and where this film ranks. And you said that some people say the film can't justify itself. I'm like,
does a slasher movie need to justify itself?
No, it's
I thought the
also
point of these
entertainment.
things was like,
and I think
just
that
like one
the
after
way
the other.
To me, this film though, it was entertaining. I enjoyed watching it. Had a good time. It moves briskly. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's not boring. And I think that there's something to be said for that in today's day and age. And the other thing is like, does this film in my, old man mind, does it, I'm like, oh, it's not as good as the 90s Screams, they were way better. But, sure. Okay. Maybe that, but like compared to movies now, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, although
So it depends on what you're
it's just
how
missing
you're
the fact that it's
grading
not set in the 90s, which makes
Exactly.
anything better. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But you're right, Aaron. It shouldn't have to justify itself.
No, it shouldn't have to justify itself, but also part of the whole thing about being a commentary on franchises is like franchises continue on regardless of whether they need to or not, or whether you like it or not. And that's the cinematic landscape we live in. And truly, what better franchise is there to make fun of that and to make us aware of the insane hypocrisy of that than the Scream franchise? Like, it's a franchise built on the foundation that horror movies are bad. They're bad for people. That they encourage things that are like not good for
like
you.
almost all the villains in these films are like demented people who are fans of horror movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but like we have to clarify here. Like this, these new ones don't have Wes Craven anymore. Obviously, he died a few years back. But Wes Craven, of all the horror greats, was so skeptical of whether horror movies are actually something that we should encourage as a society. Like, so many of his movies are specifically about.
If you want to
I
just
don't know if horror
illustrate with
movies.
some examples.
Well, the best example is New Nightmare. His like kind of meta.
Scream before Scream.
Exactly. It's his 1994 Nightmare on Elm Street sequel, which is set in the real world with the real cast. And the whole thing is that the script for a new reboot of Nightmare on Elm Street that he's writing is so powerful it rips Freddy Krueger out of like the paranormal world into reality and starts killing off all the people associated with the original movie. And the thesis of that film is that, like, why are we wanting to bring demons into the world through our stories? Because it's like the world doesn't need this. There's enough evil in it. And now you've created something else to terrify and torment and traumatize people. Why? What is the value here? Unless you have some point, something that you can actually, some object lesson out of it, the value can't just be luridness.
Yeah.
And
Which
so
is why
that's
these are satires, then?
Exactly. But even like the Nightmare on Elm Street movies have that. The Hills Have Eyes movies have that. Wes Craven is extremely skeptical at all of his movies. Even if they don't have a satirical edge, they have a social critique edge. As in, like, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are specifically indicting suburban parents and like that suburban culture, the idea of outsiders, the idea of scapegoats, the idea of like your parents have skeletons in their closet to give you the like amazing life where you have no worries except for like what cute boy to get with at school. And Hills Have Eyes movies is all about like, oh, you literally think poor people are like mutant monsters. Like, that's what they're about. So it's fitting for the Scream series, even if it doesn't go to that degree, to have this kind of implied moral critique within the actual franchise itself, where like the fact that Hollywood keeps bankrolling Scream movies is an indictment of Hollywood, and that is required. We need Scream movies to constantly point out that Hollywood keeps making mistakes with the way it approaches horror.
So to extend
just a little interesting thing about Wes
yeah.
Craven. I don't know what his religious convictions or anything were, but he did study English and psychology at Wheaton.
Oh wow!
So he did, does have a bit of that sort of background there. So
he's just a very smart filmmaker.
So to get you to extend on this one beat, Aaron. So I haven't seen any other Bettinelli-Olpin and Gillett films or Radio Silence So do you think that they're doing something distinct from what you're identifying as kind of like Craven's horror project in some sense?
Yes.
Is this a different direction? Is it an extension? Is it a redirection?
I think they keep they are very self-conscious in the way they construct their stories. They're known for these shorts that are in the VHS films, or they directed a bunch of the stuff in the Southbound, and one of those horror anthologies. They did Ready or Not. I think they're making the new Escape from New York movie coming out soon.
Huh.
But anyways, their approach is less.
He's playing Snake in that.
I can't remember off the top of my head. Their approach is more of being like a self-conscious way of framing and structuring their horror stories. So like, for example, I think the best short they ever made is in the first VHS movie, and it's the best short in the movie. And it's like the title's like 10/31/99 or something. And it's about like a bunch of guys on a Halloween party who with their camcorder in like the late 90s or whatever who go to a haunted house, and the whole thing is the house is actually haunted, but they're all like too drunk and like out of it to really understand what they were like wandering into. And so the house has like all these practical effects of like arms coming out of the walls to grab them, like, whoa, this is crazy, man. And like so that is just purely like making fun of the idea of like people nowadays are so, horror movies have poisoned the brain to the point they can't actually comprehend reality when it's staring them in the face. They see everything mediated through stuff, which is part of the whole found footage thing, right? Found footage is the actual format of found footage is a mediated source, so it's always presented like reality is the film, is reality, and it just loops back, and it's this recursive thing,
the
right?
irony
That's
thing
implied.
about it is, that the foregrounding of the medium actually signifies realism.
What's interesting is that they bring in a couple times we get they actually utilize sort of like footage on people's smartphones to try to sort of like emphasize that the things happen, whether deceptively or not. But like, so like, in like a small form, they've actually brought in a bit of that like found footage with
Like
Ghostface.
they reused the shot of the people throwing cherry Coke at Sam.
Oh yeah, that is also
which was funny because I did drink a cherry Coke during the movie.
Oh, cherry Coke's the best Coke. But so you have that, and then you have like Ready or Not, which is their other famous, or their most popular movie that's not Scream, and that's a class satire in the guise of a final girl horror movie, or like kind of, and it's got a bit of that like murder mystery element of like you don't know who's good, who's bad. Adam Brody's in it, and he's kind of the character.
Is it
who
a bit of
waffles.
Most Dangerous Game thing too?
Well, it's a little bit, because it is the idea of like there's a predatory rich people that will like kill folks just for fun, but you don't entirely know what.
Gotcha.
It does have a bit of that murder mystery
I should
thing
watch
because it's supposed to be like they've made like a pact with the devil, and you don't know whether the pact is real or not. That's the whole thing. It might just be an excuse for these rich people to murder people. And it's the idea of like, well, they have this, these rich people are following these standards that are completely, we don't, normal people would never understand these. They're following these rules that are beyond us. And we just have to like trust that they are working in everybody's best interests. So there's like an implied class critique in the whole thing of being like, well, you're just supposed to trust rich people have the power that they have everybody's interest at heart, and that might end up meaning you die.
What year was that?
That was 2019, so that was like right before the pandemic.
Recent, yeah.
It was like an August movie, so it kind of was in that late, horror often drops in August to try and do the counter programming before the prestige stuff comes in.
I feel like that's what actually that's like a recent horror movie that has a pretty big name for itself. Like it always pops up. People mention it.
Yeah, and I think it's because it like made Samara Weaving a bit of a name. Obviously, like again, it has Adam Brody. It has some other kind of popular character actors. But basically, all this is to say is that Radio Silence have a satirical project, which is more aimed at specifically how we consume horror stories through media and our like class interests. So it's less like moral or philosophical in the way that Wes Craven is, but it's still tackling horror films with an understanding of the genre, understanding the tropes, a desire to give people what they want in an entertainment factor, but always have a slight critical lens on it.
Don't you know the rules? What rules? You don't... Jesus Christ, you don't know the rules?
Have an aneurysm, why don't you?
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. No! Big no-no! Big no!
I'm a dead man.
Sex equals death, okay? Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. No, the sin factor. It's a sin. It's an extension of number 1. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
I'm getting another beer. You want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back.
So where would you guys put this Scream 6 and say the Scream requels out of the 6 films that we have?
So I'll go first because I haven't seen them all, so I'll just go first, right? Like I think 1 is cut above all the rest. I think 2 is really good, and then I think for me 5 and 6. I've watched them very closely, sort of back to back. It's hard for me to say if one's better than the other. I think there's, as I sort of mentioned, like there's elements in the first one I prefer in terms of the I think like the meta humor. And then in this one, I actually think the set pieces are better. So I'm sort of undecided, but I'd still say I thought that these were good, enjoyable films.
I did a thing, like I had only ever seen the first 3 Scream films, so I like binged the whole series in this past week. So I literally watched the Scream movies all week. And
so what's your ranking then with
so
all these
I would
in
rank,
mind?
this is how I'd rank. I think the first Scream, which I have taught in my horror film classes, I watch quite regularly at Halloween every couple of years. I think is one of the best horror films, maybe one of my top 5 horror films ever. Like I like it that much. Like I think it's very, very good. Like masterpiece.
Is it your favorite Wes Craven? You like it more than Nightmare?
I'd have to rewatch Nightmare. I haven't watched Nightmare since like high school, so I'm probably
I'll
due
speak
for a Nightmare
blasphemy
rewatch.
and say like I don't actually love Nightmare on Elm Street,
I'm
but
aware.
I need to revisit it. I'll say I'm open to revisiting it, but I didn't love it.
Anton, you and I should watch them. Maybe a couple of them this year.
I rewatched it on Halloween a year and a half ago with my mother-in-law.
You forced her to.
Her comment was, "Is this supposed to be funny? Because this is very funny." I'm like, "Yes, it is."
So I love the original Scream. I think it's one of the classic 90s movies because there's very few films that to me like also say 90s as much as that. The one thing I'm always sad is that they did not keep the name Scary Movie for this series. Instead gave it up and then let the comedy, the parody, take it. Because I think that would have been great if they were just all called Scary Movie. But I also really like number 2. I don't think it's as good as the first, but I like it a lot. It held up to rewatching after a number of years, and so I rank them number 1, number 2, and then I might actually rank these 2 new ones next. I like them.
Oh yeah, over 3 and 4.
Yep, I like 3 and 4. Don't get me wrong. Some people genuinely don't.
Which
like
is better,
3
and
or
4? Which is your bottom?
Now,
a lot of people like 4 quite a bit.
So
though,
a lot
actually.
of people like 4, and this is where I will probably dissent from most people. I understand why people like 3 the worst, but I probably preferred 3 to 4.
Like it the worst,
or like
no, they still like might like it.
Yeah,
kind of.
but some people genuinely don't like.
But do people hate it?
It's true.
Do some people hate it?
Some people do.
Yeah, but I would rank them 3 then 4, and my reasoning for that is
1, 2, 5,
so 1,
and 6.
2, 5, 6 are. It's hard to say. I'd probably lean 5 then 6, just slightly, like almost then 3, 4. And now my reasons for putting 3, which is a ridiculous movie, and that's partly why I like it. Like it's so over the top, it's so goofy. I love that just the tackiness of that era. The casting of the film is so good.
Lance Henriksen
basically playing Wes Craven. With
Yeah.
the hair and everything. You got a cameo by Roger Corman. It's great.
Yeah.
The Parker Posey is very, very funny. Patrick Warburton. Oh man, like it's.
I actually really like the opening scene in 3 with
Cotton Weary.
Yeah, the Cotton Weary in the car and like
it's just a very. What I like about it is that it captures that LA feel really well. It's so scuzzy in LA and like people who are just trying to like climb up the Hollywood ladder, and whereas Sydney's just such an earnest character. Anyway, I kind of like it for that, even though while I understand, I think the second half of the film's a little weaker than the first, but it has the great. But I like movies. I generally like movies that are set in like a Hollywood mansion with like secret passages and stuff like that. So, I mean, maybe it's because I love The Rocketeer as a kid. I don't know, that kind of stuff. And 4, I don't dislike 4. 4 has a good cast. Like I said, the opening pre-credit kill scene is great. It's one of
with
really,
Kristen
really
Bell.
good. Yeah.
So Aaron, what's your rank?
I just briefly jumping off the Scream 3 points is that it's the 2. So the good thing about Scream 3, which I never hear anybody really talk about, is that the movie is essentially a Me Too satire before that was even a thing. Like the whole movie is about.
It's 20.
It is about how Hollywood like chews up women and spits them out, and just like the whole Hollywood machine is an abuse complex for women. And the movie is very pointed about that, and the fact that you get a Hollywood movie that's dealing with that in 2000, very interesting to look
also,
back
as
on.
This new film points out, only Scream where there's only one killer.
It's true. And don't spoil it for Anton. You saw the movie.
You saw the movie, so he knows who it is.
Scream 6. But you don't know all the who's and whys.
I want to Scream
which
where
is pretty ridiculous.
I want to Scream where everyone but the main character is actually Ghostface.
That'd be
Where
pretty
they
good.
reveal
It's
like everyone comes out and they're like, we were all
You have like
ghosts.
City of the Dead, a City of Scream.
City of Scream. Scream 7, City of Scream. Scream City.
Scream. Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so
I think the bad thing about Scream 3 is it's such a simple thing, but it actually is almost like a game breaker. It's the fact that Ghostface can mimic other people's voices.
Yeah, I was telling Anton how he has a little thing
Which
that
is
allows
like-
him to like.
It's too ridiculous. It gives him like superpowers.
That sounds very Scooby-Doo.
Yes, it's
Oh, yeah.
that one is very Scooby Doo.
Well, exactly. And then again, a good
mansion,
thing about
yeah.
it is that in terms of the goofiness, is that it is probably the most slapsticky of all of them, to the point where Ghostface is getting like punched and kicked and like
Flipped
knocked out
over.
of windows and flipped over and like thrown downstairs constantly.
Like it borders on being a scary movie.
He is just taking a beating constantly in that film and always getting up and like running awkwardly.
Also,
Wait,
like
wait,
Patrick
how
Warburton
many-
as the bodyguard. It's just
Wait, how many scary movies are there?
Like
I don't
4.
know. Too many.
Is there more than there's? Yeah.
The Wayans just don't stop. They do like a movie a year. There was at least 4. I know that.
It rented
So my
very
ranking,
well at Blockbuster in the day.
it's true. My ranking briefly, Scream 1 is the best. I'd put 2 and 5 next, kind of equal. I think
5
Scream
that
2
high?
might.
Wow.
I really like Scream 5. I did a similar thing to you, but Andrews, where I watched them all, but I did it last year, where I'd seen 1 through 3. I hadn't seen 4, but knowing, because we were in the stupid like January lockdown, and I knew Scream was going to be the new movie opening on February 1st, and so I was like, okay, the last 4 days of January, I'm watching a Scream movie a day to lead up to go into it, and everybody in the theater was like so into it. Everybody was just like howling and like loving it so much. So it was just a great
You went to the
experience.
theater in your Ghostface mask.
I feel like I almost should the next time there's a Scream movie. I'm enough of a Scream fan at this point.
But you got to ride the subway now with it.
And do like a creepy, like I'm gonna go up to stab somebody, then turn off at the last second.
Get off the subway. Yeah.
And then you're gonna get like shot by a guy in like a convenience store with a
Okay.
shotgun.
Very, very brief comment. The subway scene is awesome. Simply just for like the tension's really good about like, oh, do we know that Ethan's the killer or not? Blah blah blah. Which, Anders, do you know who Ethan is?
I recognize him from something.
Yeah. No, you mentioned him on the last podcast episode. He's Spider in Avatar.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Yes.
What?
Yeah. Spider.
That's why he looks so
he
familiar.
gave such a
I was-
strong performance.
No, I was Anton. Didn't I say at the movie? I'm like, I recognize that guy. What's he from?
Well, you were like Spider for
Supporting actor.
He's very good in this too.
But yeah, he's got that kind of innocent
I
smile.
want to die of a virgin.
Yeah. No, but I love all the different horror movie characters in the car, and the joke of having like the Babadook on there and stuff, even to like reference back to 5. So yeah, I would have 1 and then 2 and 5, and then I'd probably have 6 and then 3, and then 4 I'd have last, not because I think there's anything necessarily wrong with 4 or anything.
On its own, it actually is enjoyable.
Exactly. But my issue with 4 is that it actually does seem like the film that is on an island, and it makes sense because it's the one that was like there's a 10-year gap between the one before and the one after. And so it seems a little stranded as to being like, what is this movie commenting on about Hollywood? Because it doesn't quite justify it in the way that all these other ones do. Even if I think that one's actually quite vicious.
Yeah.
Is that crazy?
Like the kill. Yeah, it's Craven's last movie, I think, right? Yeah. But I do like them all.
Here's a ranking type question, or maybe you don't even have to rank, but like, is there a Scream movie that fails to deliver the requisite phone call opening sequence in a way that's actually like effective? So, because I would say with the 6th one, I was like actually surprised that they pulled it off. Like, this is the 6th time doing like this sort of phone call thing,
But they had to do
and it
the
was like it
double
worked.
reversal.
It was it's one of the highlights of the movie.
Yeah, with the reversal though, you have to have the reversal.
Yeah.
I was
but,
like, at first, I was like, oh my goodness, they're giving away.
So because you've seen them all, do they like, does anything fall short? It's not really.
No,
having a
is
good one?
like hilariously good in its opening.
So really, they're not going to make it. It's almost like they're like sitting down. They're like, we can't make the movie unless we have a really good idea for how we're going to
No, exactly,
do that, right?
Anton. I actually think I'd go a step further, where I feel like the way you would pitch a Scream movie is like you have to have that opening scene, right?
1 and 2 just have such amazing opening scenes.
Well, actually, I thought Anders' comment your last night when we watched it, that you were like, the first movie's scene. The crazy thing about it is that it's been parodied, and then like, you know, it's duplicated and played off of in all the Scream movies. But you're like, it's still a really good horror sequence.
Oh, it's
really
legendary.
scary.
Like
That's
I
the
would
thing.
almost like, I know that this is maybe hyperbole, but it's like up there with like the like a Hitchcock scene.
No, it's
like Psycho.
It
Yeah.
deserves to be talked about the way that you talk about the shower sequence in Psycho.
And
It
the
deserves
reversal
that.
of like, people thought Drew Barrymore was going to be like, you cast a fairly big star, and then like kill her off in the first.
It's great.
like,
It's
10
great
minutes,
in concept, great in execution. It's a great sequence.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween. You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters?
Yeah.
What's yours?
Guess.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Is that the one where the guy had knives for fingers?
Yeah, Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, that's right. I like that movie. It was scary.
Wow, well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
So, you got a boyfriend?
Why? You want to ask me out on a date?
Maybe. Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
But I think maybe, Anton, the reason why I think the Scream series is probably the best horror movie franchise is because every movie is delivered on that opening scene promise. Like, it's almost like if you pass that test, the movie is going to be good.
Well, I'll say that my weird take perhaps is that I'm like, out of the recent, you know, if we took like 5 and 6 is kind of like also kind of their own thing, like sort of like the rebooted sequence. It's like, I do prefer the David Gordon Green, probably Halloween trilogy, even though it's more bizarre in some sense. Like, you know, like 5 and 6
too, though, right?
5 and 6, I would say like we should actually give them credit for being just like really competent further entries in, whether you want to call it a slasher or whatever, or a meta horror series. Like the fact that they've delivered 2 good movies as number 5 and 6 like deserves a lot of credit. Still playing, you know, the variation and repetition within within having to do a very specific set of things. I just think like now I've had some distance in like sort of comparing horror movies and weird takes. Like I actually think it'll be cool to revisit David Gordon Green's Halloween stuff in a few years and like think of it as a trilogy. Because I think on our podcast in October, I was talking about it and I was like, you know what? Like I almost just wish he would have done the first one and not done the other 2. But now that I think about it, you're like, it's such a weird kind of like trilogy, and like the whole Corey stuff, which like is kind of ridiculous. But
this is the Corey Cunningham fan podcast. But
you've reached the Corey hotline.
Yeah, basically it's becoming a Corey.
Oh, we're
Cunningham
huge. We are like
the only people in the world who love Corey.
We should position ourselves online as like the primo Corey. Like we will stand by Corey. I stand with Corey.
I
did nothing wrong.
I even like the second one, like just how ridiculous the town be like, we gotta go get him.
Yeah, that whole scene where
there's
there's like it's like a full action scene fighting.
Evil dies tonight. Anton, can I pose the possibility that it is simply because David Gordon Green is a very good filmmaker?
Yeah.
And so even when he's doing something that's like weird in concept, he's like very good at the film aspect of it,
which makes me very excited for him and McBride doing a new Exorcist movie this
in November.
I'm very.
But is he gonna have like the Danny McBride humor? It's just, you know, like the priest is just like saying some ridiculous, vulgar, terrible stuff. Like
Righteous Gemstones meets the Exorcist.
Yes.
Oh
exactly.
yeah, that's
the
what it is.
Gemstones have to come and deal with them.
do an exorcism.
John Goodman has to take this demon out.
Any last thoughts, either of you guys, about Scream or horror movies today?
I'm curious if they're going to try and round it out for the second trilogy.
Kind of feel they should.
I feel like they've done the 2. They might as well do a 7 and just see if they can.
This one's making good money again, so I think it will.
Yeah, didn't have a really good opening weekend. I think
it's almost made as much as Scream 5 already. So And obviously that was different circumstances, but it might end up with like 100 million, which is like a lot for a horror movie.
I do have to say, like, I don't entirely understand some of these like release schedules, because I get that like horror gets dumped often in February, March, because there's not a lot else.
But how would this movie not make a bank in October?
No, I know, but like my thing is, and then October is turning into like an early. It's almost like the Christmas blockbuster season is extending backwards into like October now, and like so like October is not just like horror movies and stuff. Like you're getting like things, and then there's movies where like this, which are set around Halloween, which are embracing like Halloween atmosphere, and you're like you know, I enjoyed seeing this. This would be really fun to see in theaters around Halloween.
Do you like scary movies, Sydney?
Thanks for joining us for this discussion of Scream. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you next time.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.